Vocês vão conhecer o Ollie Bray. O Ollie, ele foi professor por 20 anos na Escócia. Ele trabalhou como conselheiro do governo da Escócia para novas tecnologias e para mudanças de políticas em inovação e educação. E hoje ele é diretor da Lego Foundation e o cargo dele diz muito sobre esse trabalho. O cargo dele, ele é diretor para conectar o brincar e o aprender. Tem um cargo mais legal que esse, né? Conectar o brincar e o aprender. É muito legal. Então, por favor, com uma salva de palmas, vocês podem receber o Ollie Bray para o estádio? Muito bom. A palestra dele vai ser em inglês, gente. Então, quem tiver com foninho já pode preparar aí, tá bom? Ollie, muito bem-vindo. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Great. It's really great to be here, and it's really great to be back in Brazil doing some work. So I'm going to repeat the introduction probably for my first few slides. I guess I just wanted to say that the context that I've worked in for most of my career for over 20 years was Scotland. Scotland's very similar to Brazil. It's about the same size. It's got about the same amount of people. It's completely surrounded by water. It's very, very different. It's a very, very different cultural context. But I think, what I learned from working in that context has been really useful in the work that I've then gone on to do in schools and in education systems around the world. And as the introduction said, I started off as a teacher. I was a geography teacher in a high school just outside of Edinburgh. Edinburgh is the capital of Scotland. We had a big curriculum reform in Scotland, which started in 2002. Like most curriculum reforms, it's still going on. But I was really involved in the rollout of the curriculum reform from 2008 to 2012, where I had a role for emerging technologies in learning, and I ran a pedagogical team, but I also looked after the infrastructure team for schools as well. So we did the technical bit and the pedagogical bit. And that was quite unique at the time because we felt that sometimes the people with the technical expertise in government and schools didn't really understand the needs of the teachers. So it was obviously it's a smaller country, but we learnt a lot during those kind of 4 years, and we think as a result of that, we've got good infrastructure in Scotland now which supports the pedagogy rather than the technology supporting the administrative functions of the school. The problem with working with broadband and infrastructure is it starts to get a little bit boring after a while. And when you love working with children, and you love working in schools, and you love working with people, you get that draw, or I got that draw, to go back into school and to do something different. So for the last 6 years, I worked as a principal, a head teacher of a high school in the Scottish Highlands. It's called Kingussie High School. You probably have never heard of it. You may not ever go there, but it's a wonderful place to work. Inside one of Scotland's 2 national parks, interestingly enough. So a really rural area and rural challenges associated with the Scottish context. And while I was there, I continued to do work with the University of the Highlands and Islands, which is a collection of university sites spread out around the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, which all come together under one network because we found that was a more efficient way of working, particularly for things like teacher education and particularly to service local needs. For example, around opticians, nurses, and local healthcare. And I continued to have a passion around educational resources and new media for educational resources, and that has continued during the time I was in Scotland working with the BBC and what they did. I'll talk a little bit about being a head teacher today. I'll talk about some stories to do with that, but I'm also conscious that what I did within Scotland is maybe different to the context here, and I think we need to be aware of that, but I still think there's some learning from it. However, On the 1st of November last year, we decided it was time for another change. Had a wonderful offer from the Lego Foundation, and I'll talk more about the Lego Foundation in a minute. And myself and my family, we relocated to Denmark. Lego is a Danish company. It's still family owned, and I'll talk more about what the Lego Foundation does in a minute. And we live in a small town called Billund. We don't live in Copenhagen, a small town called Billund. It's very rural as well. It had lots of similarities to Kingussie in many ways. And the whole of the town really is kind of connected to Lego because it's such an important industry, in the area. This is the Lego house. It's not a model. That's a real place that exists. I wanted to mention it because it's 250 meters from my house, and I think it's really cool. But I also wanted to mention it because it was designed as a museum where children could touch everything inside it. And one of the challenges, of course, with more traditional museums, not like the Exploratorium, if you heard Sebastian's story yesterday, but the challenge with traditional museums is, again, it's very much look, 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 read the exhibit, read the exhibit. It's not that hands-on, minds-on approach that we all know is so important, and is probably, why we're here engaging in this conference. So I was asking Leo, I've known Leo for a number of years now, saying, what do you want me to talk about? And Leo was really helpful. Leo said, you can just talk about whatever you like. So I thought I'd start off by saying that I really like cycling. And there are 2 points to this, really. The first point is I'm always looking for people to go cycling with because I don't have that many friends. I travel a lot. I'm joking. Got 2 friends. But also because I think that cycling is a really good metaphor for what we're all trying to do. And let me try and explain that. When I grew up in the UK, and when I first learnt to ride a bike, this is the sort of bike that I learnt to ride. It wasn't as cool as this. It was black, and it was second-hand from a charity shop, and my mother bought it, but it was similar. And I started to ride this type of bike, and the key part about it, really, were these stabilizers, we call them, or training wheels, they're sometimes called in the United States. Do you have these in Brazil? I don't know. Are these got them? It's interesting, isn't it? If you've got them in Brazil, I would say that you also do very well out of the elastoplast industry. And I think the two are interrelated. Because what I've learned over the years is riding a bike with training wheels on it is nothing like riding a bike. And in fact, in Denmark, and I've seen this a lot, and in other countries around the world, if we want to teach children to ride a bike, we teach them to ride a bike without the training wheels and without the pedals, because the hardest part about riding a bike is the balance and not turning your legs around. Most people are pretty good at turning their legs around because it's highly linked to walking. And my point is this. My point is, throughout my career, and I think with what we're trying to do here, is I've always been really, really interested in taking something that works. There's no doubt about it, you can learn to ride a bike with training wheels on it. It's just the wrong way to ride a bike. All of the research tells us it's wrong. All of the accidents tells us it's wrong. All of the millions of dollars we spend in plasters and elastoplasts tell us it's wrong. So we need to think about different ways of riding a bike, but we're not changing the bike, right? So when we're thinking about schools, we need to think about changing schools within the current system. Right? I strongly believe that we can do that. It's still riding a bike, it's still going to school, but we're just trying to change it around the edges to make it better. And for me, and a lot of my work has been around this idea, is that technology in schools is really important. And some people will tell you that technology in schools is going to make a teacher's job easier. What I can tell you is that technology in schools will not make a teaching's job easier, because teaching is really, really hard. And it's really, really hard because we care about the kids and because we've got other pressures that are on us all of the time. But what technology should do, and what some of the activities that we can see in this conference today you'll see, or you've seen tomorrow, is it could, if we think about it, is it could make teaching different, because we've got these range of tools that we can use. And I was really interested in this word difference, and I was particularly interested when I joined the Lego Foundation, because the Lego Foundation's mission is to redefine play and also to reimagine learning. The redefined play is interesting because a lot of people think play is just what young people do. Or a lot of people think play is completely unstructured in activity. But actually, there's lots and lots of research to tell us that some of the most successful businesses in the world are playful in nature. There's lots and lots of social research to tell us that some of the best family units and communities in the world are playful in nature. And there's lots of evidence to tell us that actually play is something that we can do, and it benefits us, both academically and socially, and from a health and well-being point of view, from when we're very, very young all the way until we're very, very old. And I was really interested in this idea around reimagining learning, because for me, yes, the play was important, but the reimagining learning was the thing that was really important to me in terms of trying to do things differently in schools. So I think I should just explain a little bit about what the Lego Foundation is. So I've got some bad news for you. If you're looking to give me the best idea for the next Lego set, I am not the person to speak to about that. If you're looking for a discount on the latest Star Wars Lego model, I'm not the person to speak about that. Because the Lego Foundation is different to Lego. Here we've got Lego and the Lego entities, Lego Education, the Lego House that I've mentioned, the Lego Group. And then I think I mentioned already, but Lego is owned by a Danish family, the Kirk Christensen family, and they own within their holding company 75% of Lego, and the Lego Foundation, right, was given 25% of Lego about 3 years ago for philanthropic use. So we do a lot of work in some focus geographies that we've got. We do a lot of work in Denmark, as you would expect, and we're increasingly doing a lot of work in the humanitarian setting. And most of what we do in the Lego Foundation, and this is really important, is without the brick. It's about learning through play. And one of the reasons why I really enjoyed my time at the conference yesterday is as I was walking through the teacher exhibits, all of the things that I was seeing are what I would describe as being playful in nature. And that's really, really important to me. So I thought we'd better talk about schools, because we all work in schools or we're connected to schools in some way. And I wanted to say from the start that probably, I don't know this is a fact, but probably in schools in Brazil, just like in schools in Scotland and in South Africa and in New Zealand and in Australia and many, many other countries, in schools we always face challenging times. It's always pretty challenging to work in a school. There's lots of reasons for this. I think one of the biggest ones is time. Teachers are always under pressure with time to do more in school, quite often with less. We sometimes get challenges from children, their families, and other issues. And then we've got other drivers like politics, the curriculum, trying to achieve results. As I've said already, working in schools is a pretty hard thing to do. We've also then got, all these large technology drivers. There's a lot of talk around the fourth industrial revolution. People haven't quite figured out what it is yet. People are talking about the fifth industrial revolution. There's a lot of scare tactics, I think, when it comes to talking about technology. But that said, we have got these large technology drivers that we need to be aware of in the back of our heads. If we're going to achieve the goal of what school is for, is preparing well-rounded citizens, like within the country and within the context. And then I suppose, if you think about play and playfulness in schools, sometimes the two don't always fit together. With our work at the International School of Billund and with Harvard Graduate School of Education, we've come to call these things playful paradoxes. If I think about play being timeless, chaotic, risky, child-led, and I think about quite often what goes on in schools where it's timetabled, orderly, safe and adult-led, it's difficult to know how schools can be playful. But this is the really, really important point. Remember that I said good playfulness and good, school leadership will work within the confines of the system. So the idea is not to get to the left-hand column. The idea is just to try and get towards the left-hand column. Playing with the timetable to create a bit of space for project-based learning or for children to explore their passions. Playing with the orderly nature of the school, so children have got more choice about what they do or who they learn with. Thinking about how we teach risk without, of course, doing harm to children, because that would not be good for anybody's career. And thinking about how we can sometimes give more agency to children rather than make everything adult-led. So it's not about getting to the left-hand column, it's about working towards the left-hand column when things are appropriate. And as I've thought about this a lot over many, many years, I've decided that really it's possible. I know it's possible because I did it within the school that I led under difficult circumstances, without many staff and not very much resource. But I've concluded if we want to go this way, it's about people, empowering people, linking people together, communities of practice. It's about pedagogy, thinking about different types of pedagogy that are more child-centered, and we see a lot of that in this building today. And it's about school leadership. And for me, there are two parts to this. So first of all, actually there are three parts to this. So first of all, it's about understanding that everybody, every adult that works in a school is a leader, because they're leaders of learning in their classroom. Secondly, it's about the school principal understanding that they are either the incubators, they either allow innovation or they stifle innovation. They're the ones that can quite often give the permission. And thirdly, if you really want to improve the system, you need to understand that the children in someone else's school are as important as the children in your school. And that's about sharing resources, sharing techniques, and working together as a kind of team, a regional team, to generate what I would call system lift. It's how you improve the whole system. Schools working together in collaboration rather than competition. Because ultimately, we're here to improve the lives of children, and that's not just the children in front of us, that's the children in the region, in the country, etc., etc. And I suppose it's also a little bit about using appropriate tools. You might not be able to see this. It's a Lego movie joke. I'll read it to you. It says, "Always be yourself. Unless you can be Batman, then always be Batman." But the point with this is not the quote, it's the picture. If I wanted to put this picture up onto a wall, I probably could use a hammer, but I probably wouldn't use a chainsaw. Now, I could use the chainsaw to put the picture on the wall. I could cut a hole for it and put it in, but it's not an appropriate tool for the job. Yeah, where I lived in Scotland, I know lots of people that have bought chainsaws because they had to have one. So it's thinking about the types of tools and the appropriate tools for the job. And when we think about technology, and some of the things when we see technology in schools, it's making sure that if we want to change the system, we're not using technology, new tools with technology, to do things that we've done before. For example, we're not replacing books with e-book readers if the kids are only going to read the same book. A book is better, it's cheaper, it's quicker. We're not going to replace interactive whiteboards with normal whiteboards or projectors because actually it doesn't add any value. It adds a lot of cost. And one of the things that I loved about the playful nature of the conference and reading the tweets from yesterday, as when I walked around the exhibits, there was lots and lots of technology use, using appropriate technology, quite often appropriate low-cost technologies, which you could really imagine and see could have a long-lasting effect and impact on children in front of you. There was nothing expensive out there. It was just well-used, appropriate technology. It was using the hammer rather than buying a school load of chainsaws. So let's talk about skills just for a few minutes, because I think this is important. Because one of the challenges within any education system is the whole debate between skills and knowledge. And there are some people that think kids need more skills, and there are some people that think kids need more knowledge. There are some people that think kids only need knowledge or only need skills. But the reality of it is that children need both. And there's lots of evidence to suggest that kids have got to know stuff. And actually knowing stuff and being able to recall that stuff is really useful for some careers. If I went to my doctor and I gave him a few words about how I was feeling, and he told me he needed to go away and Google it, I would be really worried about that doctor. I expect him to be able to know stuff and to recall certain things. But at the same time, quite often we find that curriculum is filled full of irrelevant knowledge. And that's where we can create the time and space for a range of holistic skills. The challenge, of course, is what are the skills that young people need? And I think we need to be quite careful of things like this from the World Economic Forum, for example. And the reason that I'm saying we need to be careful of it is because these type of lists think about global skills. Now, there's nothing wrong with thinking about global skills, but whenever you see a list of skills like this, all of which are important, you need to look at it through the lens of what does that skill mean for my classroom, in my school, in my region, and in my country. And quite often we think about the global and the international rather than thinking about the local first. And if we don't get that local bit right first, it's almost impossible to be competitive on the international stage. So there's nothing wrong with a list of skills, but it's important that we think about localization. In the Lego Foundation, we talk a lot about holistic skills. They're no different to many of these other skills frameworks that are out there. We happen to think that these things are quite important. There are subsets to all of these skills: physical skills, social skills, cognitive skills, emotional skills, and creative skills. And as you're at the creative conference, I expect you're pleased to see the word creative in there. And that's what we're going to talk about in a second. So, if we think about then how we develop these types of skills, then for me, we develop holistic skills through engaging and immersive experiences. And I've purposely used a picture here of a child outside. Because for me, as I've said already, it's about good teachers using good tools. So that immersive experience might be an outdoor experience, or it might be a tinkering experience that Sebastian was talking about so well yesterday, or it might be an experience that's created in the classroom or visiting in a museum. There are lots of different types of experience, and the important thing is that through a child's education, they should experience lots of different things relevant to them in their local context, but being able to make links into the world. But what I know is that you don't develop rich experiences just by being told about Vikings and rivers and coding and poetry and coal mining and Pythagoras and adjectives and robotics. You don't develop these immersive experiences just by being told about these things. You know, you've got to experience these things. And in the Lego Foundation, and linking in with the title of the talk, you know, we believe that we can develop or we can contribute to some of these immersive experiences through playful approaches. And we would say that learning through play happens when the activity is meaningful, when it's joyful. Joy is different to fun, by the way. When I was training for a running race, I know it doesn't look like it now, but when I was training for a running race, during the race, it was the worst experience of my life. I hated it. But when I got to the end, I was overwhelmed with joy and satisfaction. So it wasn't fun, it was joyful. Papa called it hard fun, right? And it's about holding on to these things. Play happens socially interactive, actively engaging, and iterative. And for me, when I joined the Lego Foundation and I looked at these 5 characteristics, I thought to myself, I agree with every single one of them because I've been a classroom teacher and a school principal. And when I look at these 5 characteristics, I just think they are 5 characteristics of an excellent lesson. Because some of the best lessons in the world are going to include some of these things. They might not include all of these things all of the time, but we want the learning to be meaningful. We want the children to come out of the lesson enjoying it, wanting to come back. We want to have some social interaction if appropriate. We want them to be engaged in their learning. And we want it to be iterative. We want the children to be able to build on the process and build on their learning, as well as building products and creativity artifacts. So, we're going to have a think about learning through play. And here's a bit of Lego history for you. So the word Lego comes from 2 Danish words that means play well. And Lego didn't start off by making plastic building blocks. It started off by making wooden toys. In fact, the founder of the Lego group, Kurt Christensen, at the top of the photograph there, he started making wooden toys because he wasn't making enough money as a carpenter. He diversified and he moved at the times. Interestingly, he was still creative. He was creative as a carpenter and he was creative as a toy maker, right? Because skills are transversal, right? They link things together. They link careers together. We've got Godfrey in the middle, and we've got Kel at the bottom. Kel is now in his early 70s, and he still walks around the Lego campus. He still greets people in the morning. He's still very, very happy, and he lives that kind of joyful experience. Anyway, we're going to have a go at experiencing what feeling learning through play might look like. So we've got some volunteers here, and this is going to take a few minutes, but what we're going to do is we're going to give every single person in the room a little bag of Lego, and you're not to open it until I say go and give you the instructions. So we'll give these out. Take a breather. Okay, if you've got a bag, hold it up and shake it. And now shake it annoyingly at the person next to you. Okay, good. Okay, can we get a quick round of applause for our volunteers giving the ducks out? And now the hard fun starts. So first, we need the health and safety briefing. In a minute, I'll tell you to open your bag. Before I do that, can you look to the left and to your right and see if the person next to you is wearing glasses? If they're not wearing glasses, please open your bag slowly. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to count down from 5, and then I'm going to give you 40 seconds to build a duck. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Look at your duck. Maybe have a look at the duck next to you. Have a look at these. That's a good one there. That's good. Is that a duck or a car? Good. Okay, a few bits there. This duck's been in some kind of terrible accident. Got a shark over here. It's a duck or an aeroplane, one or the other. Excellent. Really good. Okay, so before we talk about that, we probably need the second selfie. So can we hold the ducks up? Huh? 3, 2, 1, quack. Great. So the really interesting thing about this is that as I was walking into the audience there, everybody has built something with the same things to create a unique thing. And actually, when you look at what's been created, you can imagine it's a duck. And it's obviously a duck to you, right? It's quite meaningful in terms of what you've created. So let's have a think about then what just happened. This is what I saw. So first of all, at the start, I saw a huge amount of self-regulation. There were some people that were desperate to open their bags and to get on with the tasks. But the teacher had said, no, you will wait until I tell you to open your bag and start your learning. And then I saw probably a bit of symbolic representation. You were thinking about what a duck looked like. The wooden duck that I put on the screen was nothing like the duck that you could create. So again, you were going back into your short-term and your long-term memory, and you were imagining what a duck could look like and what you could build, right, with the pieces that you had available. There was a huge amount of executive functioning going on. I could hear some people literally thinking, as you were thinking about what does a duck look like, how can I create it, How can I iterate it? Why does their duck look better than mine? Now I'm going to change my design a little bit. In schools, we call that cheating. In the rest of the world, we call that collaboration. And then as I started to count down at the end, again, that self-regulation of, right, let's get this finished product, let's get this thing finished, so I'm proud of it. And, you know, we could unpick this more. There's loads and loads of things that took place there. We could talk about motor skills, and some of you, how you need to improve your motor skills. We could talk about all sorts of different things. And it's an interesting activity to get you to experience what those 5 characteristics of play look like. It was meaningful to you. I saw lots of smiles at the end. There were some of you that definitely didn't enjoy the first 10 seconds. It was socially interactive. It was iterative. Again, a great little example of learning through play in action. And when I think about why it was useful, is I think about it in the terms of powerful learning. So the type of activity that we just did there probably wouldn't be appropriate for a group of 30 children to occupy them for 3 hours. But it was appropriate for the audience that we've got in front of us in the time period that we've got in front of us. So it involves some good pedagogy. It was well planned. I had the assistants. I've done it before, never with such a big audience. I wasn't sure how it was going to work, right? But I thought it would be appropriate, and it was pretty interesting and engaging. Some of you might have been interested because you like Lego. Some of you might have been interested because you like ducks. Some of you might have been interested because you wanted to compete and be better than the person next to you. Right? But it was interesting and engaging for these varieties of reasons. And again, it links nicely into these characteristics of play. So, what I wanted to do was just to reflect on 2 things from yesterday. So, and thinking about the characteristics. And the first was actively engaging. And one of the questions that we get a lot in the Lego Foundation is, what does playful learning look like in schools? If we want to get more learning through play in schools, what does that look like? And one of the reports that we've just been working on is we've been looking at the 5 characteristics of play, and we've been looking at existing evidence-based practice, and we've been trying to identify which types of practice are more playful. So if I was just talking to you, if it was just didactic, that's not very playful. That's about knowledge delivery. But we've got some things in here, problem-based learning, project-based learning, collaborative-based learning. By themselves, they're playful in schools, and many of these things align so well with the activities and the workshops that are going on at the conference. So most of the things are playful. And the second thing I wanted to do, before we break for questions, is I wanted to talk a little bit about creativity, and I wanted to ask you this question. Who here believes that children are more creative than adults? If you believe that, put your hand up. So I don't believe that. I just like to put my hand up to see if anybody will copy me. But you might believe it, and that's fine. Now, you might be sat there thinking, hang on a minute, we know that children are more creative than adults because I've seen a TED Talk where I'm told that children are more creative than adults. And it's been viewed millions and millions of times around the world. And in that TED Talk, there's a quote there for some research from George Land back in the 1960s, who carried out a survey with NASA to look at creativity, and then carried out the same survey with groups of children, and Land concluded that children lost their creativity skills from when they were 5 years old until when they were 2 years old. Now, there's some interesting things about this. So first of all, in the Lego Foundation, we were interested in this, and we tried to find the NASA data. We had a researcher working on it, actually, for 6 months. And it included some conversations with NASA, and we found lots of evidence of the story, and we found lots of evidence of the tests that happened on small groups of children, but no real evidence that the actual NASA study took place. Now, this isn't a problem in some ways, because doesn't it feel like children should be more creative than adults? That feels right, doesn't it? It feels right to me. But there's a challenge. And the challenge is, since Ken Robinson's talk, which is very, very good, has really advanced the field, we know a lot more about creativity than we knew before. And I want to explain this by telling a quick story. When I was a child, I had a tree house at my grandparents' house. And I used to go there at the weekends, and I used to play in the tree house. And I had great plans for this tree house. It was going to have electricity, and a fireman's pole, and a swimming pool. And the problem is just that, is that as a child, I had a great sense of imagination. But I wasn't necessarily creative. And what we know historically, and certainly increasingly from the last 10 years worth of research, is that imagination and creativity are different things. Now, imagination can spark creativity, but they're all a little bit different. And actually, if we're really wanting to develop creativity skills in young people, then we need a little bit of originality, imagination, that divergent thinking, the things that young people are so good at. But we also need a little bit of appropriateness as well. Because there would have been better things that I could have built for my treehouse that would have actually been good, creative solutions, and they would have been possible. Outwith of the domain of fantasy. And if I think about words that are associated with originality, idea generation, risk-taking, flexibility, and if I think about the words that are associated with appropriateness, evaluation, logic, persistence, focus, then actually you can start to understand that if we really want to develop creativity in young people, it's about trying to get adults and children to work together, but also to learn together. And what I saw in the workshops as I was going around yesterday, and why facilitated tinkering is such a great example of this, is because the facilitator, the teacher, they don't know what's coming next. They're having to actually learn with the children all of the time, because everybody in that class is going to create something else which is different and meaningful for that child. The teacher is not saying, you're all going to make exactly the same thing. So the tinkering activities that we've seen, the activities that we've seen here, are great examples of how we can actually develop, creativity in young people. And I'll come back to that in a second. And my next question then. Children learn more flexibly than adults. Do you think that's true or false? Put your hand up if you think it's true. I think it's true. And we know that from all of the early years research about the importance of the first 1,000 days of child's development. We know that children need early year stimulation, and we know actually, certainly as a child is growing up until puberty and beyond, adults can really influence children in quite horrible ways, right? Because the brain is still growing and they get learned behaviors. So that one is true. So to come back to my point then, is we need to think about how can children and adults work together in these kind of co-creative teams. And my challenge to you, And I would think that there'll be lots of people in the audience that are actually really good at this. But my challenge to you is to really ask yourself this question. So in your class, in the school that you lead, how often do children and adults learn together? And the key word there is learn. Not take part in activity together, but actually learn together. Because that's where I think that creativity magic can really happen. So to sum up for this little part of the talk, and I want to get my wording right here, is that I think that children are not creative geniuses, but we've got a huge amount to learn from them. That said, we need to be careful when we're working with children that we're not communicating to them that the highest form of learning is expertise, because the highest form of learning is not knowledge. And on the other side of my table, adults certainly are not creative failures. I've seen your ducks, so I know this is true. And at the same time, we as adults need to be careful not to shame each other for bringing knowledge and expertise that can bring these ideas into reality. This is about developing pedagogies, as groups of staff, and within communities with children. And I guess the next question then is around how do we teach creativity? I believe strongly that we can teach creativity by inviting children to create new things. Seymour Papert talked a lot about this. Sebastian and lots of other people were talking about this yesterday. Constructionism. We invite children to create new things. These could be using simple, everyday objects. I picked the example here from the Exploratorium because it was mentioned yesterday, and I just love it, this whole notion of a unique machine that creates a unique drawing. And these scribbling machines can jump and dance and draw around the page. And when you see people working with this type of technology, with this type of playful approach, the joy and the social interaction, all of these things, become really, really evident. And, we could think about maybe a different example here. This is an activity we do a lot in the Lego Idea Studio. And we're building this kind of cable car. I was doing this activity with some teachers in South Africa about a month ago. And we've been iterating on this for 2 hours and trying to get this work. We started off with just a motor and a few components. And there was story and there was narrative around it. And this was the showcase. Showcase is so important in tinkering and making activities. And again, you can just kind of, see, what's happening in terms of the challenge, but also the frustration as one of the models falls off, that kind of iteration, but frustration with support, which is really important. In these type of activities, frustration and failure are seen as being good things that we can learn off. And then there's quite amazing contraption, at the end that built and went up and did that. And again, just examples, of these very, very different, playful activities that we can do. We can also, of course, create digitally, purely digitally, using things like Scratch and other creative coding software. Great to see the Scratch cat outside yesterday. And of course, we can link this into more sophisticated things like robotics or other kind of robotic solutions. And for me, where I think this gets really powerful is where we think about these things in isolation, or whether we think about two of the things together some of the time if appropriate, or sometimes we can actually combine all three things to create really powerful, learning environments for young people. And I guess kind of, in sort of final conclusion before I wrap up, it's just to really emphasize this point, that for me it's about children and adults working and playing together, and that's what's really going to enhance their collective genius. And importantly, I think, that's what's going to make children curious. And if we get it right as adults, that's what will make us curious as well. And you know what? There's nothing like a bit of curiosity to really motivate you as a classroom teacher, and as a school leader, because that feeling of curiosity is a wonderful, overwhelming thing. And we need to remember that really we want children to be curious, and we want our teachers to be curious, because we can't lose and forget the fact that schools are in the business of developing people. They're not in the business of preparing kids for tests or teaching knowledge. That's a subsidiary of what we do, and it's an important thing of what we do. But ultimately, we do these things because we're there and we're in the business of developing people, and that's why we've got into education. And if I think with my school leader hat on about how we take that into the domain of the teacher and the school leader, for me, it's about teachers and school leaders being curious, looking inwards, reflecting on their own ability and their own skills, looking outwards to compare themselves to each other to help them get better, to work collaboratively in networks such as this, in professional working groups such as this, but always just keeping that one eye on the horizon. Because sometimes what you're doing is good enough, just like riding a bike with stabilizers, but then somebody comes along with what you should be doing, and you're not prepared and resilient enough to be able to adapt for that. And we develop that resilience, I think, through partnership. So, in summary, I think there's a growing global interest in playful and creative learning. There's a massive amount of interest in terms of what's going on in Brazil with the Brazilian Creative Learning Network. There really is, because it's led by teachers, it's led by practitioners, and it's got good support, but there's a great interest around some of these things going on and the work going on. We do need to prepare children and adults, and we all need the skills for change, but it's important to think local first before international. Let's get it right in our local communities first, but before thinking globally. We gain these skills through these engaging experiences. I would say that some of the activities that we see on here are engaging. There are other types of engaging experiences as well. And we can develop these deep, immersive experiences through teacher collaboration, reflection, and iteration. And I honestly believe, and we've not really talked about this too much, is that we can apply all of this learning to sorting out complex problems. And believe me, there's no more of a complex problem than education. And if it wasn't complex, we would have solved it already. So that's the end of my talk. I put this slide in to see if it would make sense. I show it in Scotland. Because although, we've had some fun and we've looked at some little bits of research, I think a lot of what I'm telling the people in the audience, which is why you're here, is common sense. It's good teaching and learning because we care about schools, we care about education, and we care about children. So I don't know whether this translates, but it's called Gary's Weather Forecasting Stone. And it's a stone hanging from a piece of string. It's quite playful. And it says, stone is wet, raining. Stone is dry, not raining. Shadow on the ground, sunny. Stone jumping up and down, earthquake. Stone gone, tornado. So just a small example of what we're doing is good. We need to continue doing good work in difficult circumstances, because ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to improve the lives of children in our local context. Thank you very much.
Hello, great presentation. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. And I was curious about the fact that you mentioned very specifically the curiosity that we have to explore with our teachers. My question is, how can we explore those curiosity? Are there trigger questions? Are there images? Are there videos? How do you work with this?
Yeah, it's a great question. So for me, I like to think about when we try and develop curiosity and good learning with children, part of that is giving children agency and deciding what they want to look into. And I think there's increasingly a lot of evidence and a lot of success, and I can speak about this personally and within the work we're doing in the International School of Billund, is having small groups of teachers to work together around something that they're interested in to do with teaching and learning. So I would call this collaborative inquiry, or I like to call, we also have a model of it called playful participatory research. And it's kind of the same thing, apart from with playful participatory research, it's important that the process is playful for adults as well. And what we found, or what I found when I was a head teacher, and what we found when we rolled the model out into other Scottish schools, and now in Billund, is that if you get groups of teachers together, normally 3s, no more than 4, working in a learning trio, and you spend a lot of time with them where they're trying to figure out what do they want to know more about, and they get the moans and the challenges of time out of the way, but then they actually come down to a question they want answered. How do I improve feedback in my classroom? How do I create some time and space for these activities? How could I do literacy, in a more playful way? And then that bit of space for these teachers to go away and to research that. Not in an academically robust way, because we suppress pedagogy sometimes by putting too much structure on it, but in that trial and error way to see what can be achieved. And then, just like all good playful activities, there's some kind of showcase and feeding that back, or teachers are encouraged to share some of these ideas online or online community. So I really think if we want to develop curiosity in teachers, we need to provide ways for them to become curious about something that they're interested in. Quite often in schools, we tell teachers what they should be interested in, and actually they're not interested in it, and we don't get progress. Great.
Hi, hello. We are talking a lot about teaching creativity, but I'd like to know more about assessing creativity and also how to provide feedback for our students about it.
So, there are a number of ways where the evidence suggests that you can assess not necessarily creativity, but certainly creative thinking. The challenge around all of these things is that they're incredibly highly complex to actually apply, in schools. And quite often, a lot of the work that we've done around creativity assessment is really more about assessing creativity in adults rather than children. So the measures that are used a lot of the time, the metrics that are used aren't age appropriate, and I think therefore we sometimes get, skewed results. For me, and this is what we did in my school, and it maybe isn't as robust as some of these national or international tests, but we sat down first of all with staff, and we looked at the skills that we thought were going to be relevant for our children, and this included some hard skills and some soft skills. For example, numeracy and literacy, hard skills, and some soft skills such as communication, collaboration, and creativity. And I spent a whole 2 half days with staff where we sat down and we worked out what does creativity or good creativity look like in Kingussie High School? What does good collaboration look like in Kingussie High School? What does good communication look like in Kingussie High School? And we came up with lists of things, and we came up with examples of things that were already happening within the curriculum. And then we also identified gaps. And then, at the end of the session, that had gone really, really well, one of the teachers put their hand up, and this is the teacher that you say, right, we're leaving the session now. Has anybody got any questions? And there's this one person always puts their hand up. And what you were worried about as a teacher is that they always had a really good point. Like, you wanted to get home, but they always had a good point. And they said, it's a really interesting activity, Ollie. We've got an idea now about what creativity looks like in Campo High School and how, and how we could measure if students have improved creativity and whether they've improved the creative output. But we've answered this question, or we've done this piece of work as adults. So if your point is it's children and adults working together, which it has been for many years, you need to ask the children. So we thought, that's an interesting idea. So then what we did is we repeated the same activity, this time over 5 half-day workshops, looking at what we came up with, and then the kids literally pulling it apart and changing it and saying, well, actually, you might think that that's an example of creativity, but we don't think that is. And we really focused on the local with some of these kind of hard skills. So when, like, a school inspector would come into Campo High School and say, how can you justify that you're helping these children become more creative? We were able to say, well, these children have experienced these things, and they are able to articulately reflect on their learning about how they think they have become more creative and more collaborative and more communicative. And we put all of this information and evidence within basically ePortfolio so that it was there. So it's a slightly different way of looking at it. It's harder to do because it takes time and you've really got to think about it. But I just think it's a lot more personal to the school and the context than some of these very, very hard measures that aren't really designed to assess creativity. So I'm not sure if I've 100% answered your question, but some stories at least. Yeah. Okay?
First, I'd like to thank you for the presentation. And I have a question, because a lot of my students are teenagers and adults. Can similar techniques be used with older students?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the duck is a small activity that we did, but without any disrespect, there's not a lot of really young people in the room. I was waiting for the translation. So for me, it's about the reason I like to do the duck activity is because for 20 minutes I've been explaining what learning through play is, but I'm explaining it without context. So the reason I don't do the duck first is because I want to give some of the theory first, but then I want to get you to feel it, to see what that means. And then once you've felt it, you can then think about how can we relate this to other activities. But for older children in particular, the report that I flagged up, and I'll share this with the organisers so it can be shared. The teaching pedagogies paper, like learning through play in schools, is very, very relevant to these playful pedagogies and also develops creativity. And I can't emphasize enough, for me, the two standout ones are collaborative learning. There's a huge amount more potential that we could be doing with older learners around collaborative learning. Young kids are actually pretty good at it, but older children, could be a lot better at it, particularly, and it's also a great technique to learn in a playful way to actually prepare for tests. So it's an amazing kind of way to do it. And also the project-based learning as well, with a real emphasis on projects, not puzzles. Because I think there's far too much stuff in schools where kids are just solving the same puzzle over and over again, which I'm not saying is not important, but it only requires a certain skill set, and it's not got that kind of open-ended project-based learning, those high ceilings that Sebastian was talking about tomorrow. So I think, in summary, highly relevant, but it's about getting the young people to experience it. Once they experience it, they see the relevance, and then as the teacher framing it in appropriate activities. Great. Okay. I think we've run out. I think we've run out of time, but we can get other questions at the end if people have them, but we need to move on to the next workshop. So thanks again, everybody. Look forward to seeing you over the next day and tomorrow if you're around.
Thank you so much, Ollie.